You're listening to Nostalgia Club, the podcast where we look back on our favorite childhood stories and revisit them as adults. At least one of us hasn't read or watched these series, so we also get a first-timer's opinion. Spoiler alert, we will be discussing storylines and future events beyond the first books and episodes, so proceed with caution. Hello, and welcome back to the continuation of our kid detective spy story series.
Yeah, it's really been a running theme recently. Huh?
Today we're talking about Nancy Drew, which, if you haven't listened to last week's episode about the Hardy Boys, recommend that you listen to that because we're probably going to reference it a little bit, just like how we referenced Nancy Drew a little bit in that episode. I'm Victoria, and as usual, I'm joined by...
Jino.
And Michael.
Nice.
We did it. So like I said, we are talking about Nancy Drew today, which I'm very excited about. I was a little bit obsessed with this series growing up.
Victoria.
I say this about a lot of series, but like truly, Nancy Drew was the blueprint for me.
Let me paint a picture for the listener of what I see in the room. Because Victoria comes in and says, I'm a little underprepared. And she has her iPad and two of the books we read for Nancy Drew, as well as a giant blue, what is it called, Victoria?
It's called The Lost Files of Nancy Drew.
Yeah, so what, part scrapbook, part just like art book, part like fandom piece, I
It's
suppose?
like coffee table book size.
Yeah.
It's pretty big.
So Victoria's serious here.
Yes, I wanted to bring it for a little bit of show and tell because it covers some of the most iconic Nancy Drew cases within the original 56-book canon of the classic Nancy Drew book series. Obviously, there have been many more Nancy Drew books, but specifically when I was in third grade, I wanted to read every single book in the original 56 books in order. I don't know why I needed to read them in order, because you don't need to read them in order whatsoever. There's hardly any carryover. There's Nancy and her two best friends, and they all have boyfriends. And then there's her dad and her lovely housekeeper / mother figure. But other than that, there's not really any references to other books. Or at least if there are references, they're very surface level. Just like, oh yeah, one time I solved that case. You can pick up any book and you will understand what's going on in the world of Nancy Drew. But I was insistent that I wanted to read every book from number 1 to 56 in order. And I did. And I also used to read a Nancy Drew book a day. I was very proud of this fact. Obviously, I skipped some days because sometimes it would take time to get the next one from the library because they didn't have all of them at the same time.
Now they do.
And now
because
they
of
do.
you.
I was the revolution. No, I'm kidding.
Finally, I have them all.
Yes.
Nice reference. Listen to our Gravity Falls episode for context on that.
For today's episode, I had Jino and Michael read The Secret in the Old Attic and The Mystery of the 99 Steps. The Secret in the Old Attic is definitely one of my favorites that I can remember, just in terms of vibes, I guess. And then The
Excellent
Mystery of
vibes.
the 99 Steps is just a kind of a cool concept. But I will admit, Nancy Drew is one of those books where when I try to reread them as an adult, they definitely are not as fun as when I read them as a kid.
Yeah.
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 I'm just going to put that out there. I still love Nancy Drew. It's very near and dear to my heart. But they aren't as exciting as when I read them as a kid.
Well, you know, coming off of something like Hardy Boys, Undercover Brothers, skydiving, knife-wielding, taser-defying, EMT slaying, motorcycle riding, extreme sports, participating, CD burning, brothers, it's quite the tone shift.
Yeah. It's particularly the style of writing that's in these books. I
It's
think
fascinating.
it's really interesting. It reminds me a little bit of when we talked about The Secrets of Droon, where, for example, the characters say they're going to do something that would take a decent amount of time, but then basically by the next line, they're there. A very similar thing happens in Nancy Drew where it'll say, Nancy decided to go to bed. And the very next line, not even a chapter break or any separation whatsoever, it'll say, the next morning, Nancy woke up and walked downstairs. So the pacing is interesting. I think maybe it is, again, meant to be someone reading it to you. Or maybe just for younger readers, you don't need as much in-between stuff to fill in the blanks. But that was definitely one thing I noticed. But I will say there were still moments that caught me by surprise that had me on the edge of my seat where I was like, oh no, is Nancy going to be okay? So it's not to say I didn't enjoy them. I just definitely enjoyed them way more when I was 8 years old.
And that's okay. That's what this podcast is about.
Yeah. Enough about me and my vibes. Jino, Michael, what did you think?
I had a great time. I listened to these in audiobook form, both of them. Not like Twitch stream read-alongs, but straight up like audiobook. The first one I read, I tried to go in like order, even though you don't have to. So I read the earlier one first, that one being The Secret in the Old Attic, which was a much more, it was a local mystery centered around Nancy's hometown. And it was pretty like easy to access and pretty tangible in terms of like, oh, there's this deceased person's music. You know, it's been stolen or it's being
stolen?
There's an older gentleman named Mr. March. His son died quite young, and so did his daughter-in-law, leaving him his young granddaughter, but he doesn't have a lot of money, and so he's worried that he's going to lose custody of his granddaughter. So he asks for Nancy's help locating his son's compositions, because his son was a great musician and composer, and he thinks that if we can find these compositions, then we can sell them, and then that will be a great source of income, and then I can keep taking care of my granddaughter.
And then mysteriously, his music is being shown up in a produced state on the radio. So someone is stealing it and claiming it as their own. And there's also this tandem storyline of a case that her father, who is a lawyer, is investigating about.
It's like a fabric plant.
Like a textile manufacturing plant, like a smaller independent one, suspects that it's had its like formula and process stolen by a larger plant. And I've noticed that between these two books, something that shows up and is often the case is that her father's case is linked to Nancy's mystery.
Yes, Nancy often helps her father with his cases, and a lot of those times the cases will end up linking up and be related in some way.
And I found that was interesting, especially coming off of the Hardy Boys, where the whole mystery is like, who did it? Mm-hmm. Oh, you don't know. We have a list of suspects, and it turns out it was the janitor that you didn't think about.
Yeah.
But for the Nancy Drew books, it's more like the slow accrual of evidence.
Yeah.
Or it's like the actions of the perpetrator are inevitably loud enough that you kind of figure out who's involved and like who's likely at least one of the culprits relatively early on. But a lot of Nancy's work has to do with almost not always like finding the culprit, but discovering the motives of whoever is causing trouble.
Yeah. And most importantly, getting solid evidence. Because her dad is a lawyer, she knows that certain types of evidence will hold up better in court. So, for example, them just hearing one of Mr. March's son's songs on the radio is not going to be enough for them to build a case saying they stole our music, because all you have is the memory of one man and some vague claims about whose music belongs to who. They could easily say, oh, well, we didn't steal anything. It's just we happened to come up with something that sounds similar. That can easily happen. It sometimes happens nowadays. There's only so many keys on a piano, right? So a lot of Nancy's work is trying to find the evidence, trying to build the case for her client so that they can win.
It's very interesting in that regard because there's I don't know. Well, especially in the case of the old attic, there's like a very tangible human element to it where at the same time, Nancy's just kind of like spending a lot of time with this old man in his like mysterious large manor that's like 200 years old, and gets her like friend involved to be a housekeeper and is like finding things in said attic to pawn off to help him like afford stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was like really enjoyable, seeing this sort of slow progression that's in parts more like atmospheric, and it's sort of like seeing all the disparate pieces of this wide picture, and you know, like, okay, this person whose name is Harry Trott and is clearly up to no good is like definitely involved, but I don't know how exactly.
I think it's Bushy Trott, actually.
Bushy Trott, okay. Well,
similar, yeah.
Forgive me.
Harry Bushy, same thing.
Yeah. It's like, I know he's a nefarious actor, but I don't know exactly how or what he's doing to get access to the music.
Yeah.
And I know he's probably the mysterious prowler that we've seen in the dark, but I don't know how he connects to the textile manufacturing mystery.
Well, sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
Contrasting with the Hardy Boys again. In the Hardy Boys, when they think someone is suspicious, they think they did it immediately. Whereas I think Nancy takes a more of the innocent until proven guilty approach, where she knows someone is suspicious, but she still wants to make sure to confirm that her suspicions are correct before just going and confronting someone.
She's very professional.
Yeah.
The boys really have to argue amongst themselves that, like, I think he did it. No, hold on. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's go about this slowly. Let's collect evidence. Well, Nancy's like, perhaps. Add it to the list.
Yeah.
Like puffing smoke on her non-existent pipe. Like,
Better not jump to conclusions.
So that was very fun and interesting, and I liked that slow unspooling, that bit of intrigue, and in scenes where, for example, like you said in our Hardy Boys episode, she kind of has to like cover for herself to a certain degree as she's investigating and come up with excuses for why she's at different places. Where for the boys, it's more so just like, hey, you, tell me about this. And they're like, why are you asking so many questions? And they're like, answer the question. So, like, that was all very enjoyable. Where it started to lose me a bit was perhaps in the 99 Steps, which, interestingly, the first book we read, Case of the Old Attic, or Secret of the Old Attic, was written in 1944. And I think that's a part of what is described as like the original run, because it was from the same author, I believe, Mildred Benson.
Yeah, so the history of Nancy Drew is a little interesting, which I will get into a little bit more later. But one thing to note is that Nancy Drew, when it was first written, there was an original run, and then starting in, I believe,
59, was it?
Yeah, around like the 60s and 70s, they started revising the Nancy Drew books. So what I found out is not only did they change some of the content, I mean, obviously these books are still dated. There's still definitely some not great gender and racial stereotypes that are in these books, but they made Nancy's character different.
Yeah.
In the original run of the series, apparently she was a lot more quote-unquote unruly and violent.
Huh.
Which is kind of cool.
Kind of awesome. I want to read those.
Yeah, I want to read that, Nancy.
More so, and even more than like the idea of the Hardy Boys being violent, because it's like two boys who are sanctioned by the government to commit like government-sanctioned violence versus one woman who's alone and doesn't expect violence, but will like put up a fight,
it takes, yeah.
You know, if she finds herself in that circumstance.
Yeah, but they made it so that she was more, I guess, palatable to general audiences. She would always say things kindly or sweetly. Like it always says like, Nancy said this kindly. Nancy said this sweetly, right? So it's very interesting. Nancy is both kind of a very traditional female character where she's very like housekeeper-y, where she'll help her clients clean up and cook dinner and all these things. But at the same time, she also is very much like a go-getter and will stand up to authority and just strike out on her own to solve cases if she needs to. And I think that's the general appeal of this character, who kind of does both.
Yeah.
What did you think, Jino?
I had a similar vibe to Michael. I started reading the 99 Steps and I got about halfway through and I was like, my brain hurts. And then I audiobooked The Secret of the Old Addict and I actually really, really liked it. And then I was able to go back to the 99 Steps and finish it out. I liked Nancy's character, although I do wish I had read the more unruly kick butt version of Nancy.
Yeah.
But she appears to me, in my personal interpretation, as someone who knows what society expects from her and sort of uses that almost as a weapon to get out of situations or get into situations where she needs information or to follow someone or to sneak into somewhere. And I found that really interesting. I also really liked, again, the homegrown vibes of the Old Attic. And also just the saddest man I've ever read. He's like, oh, my son's dead and my wife's dead and my son's fiance's dead and I live in this big mansion. You're like, okay, he has the big mansion and it's empty. I've sold all of my possessions and I still can't afford food. And you're like, oh my God, this man's so sad.
Yeah.
And then the moment you think it can't get worse, somebody chucks a rock at his head.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, I will go home now. And then he's knocked unconscious and you're like, oh my God. No! Poor Mr. March. Things turn out in the end, but oh man, that's how you get me to sympathize with the character. You take everything from him. The 99 Steps one, I struggled with a bit more, just because it's sort of all over the place.
Yeah, it meanders.
I did not remember that it was all over the place. I mostly chose that because I was looking through the Lost Files of Nancy Drew, and The premise that got my attention was there's this woman, she's been having a dream about the 99 steps that she thinks is just a dream, but then she gets a letter saying, don't tell anyone about the 99 steps. So that really intrigued me. And I thought that most of the book was going to focus on that. And I started reading the book and I was like, oh, so much is happening, but I'm not following a lot of it.
It's a lot of just going around France, and I learned stuff. They include a lot of interesting facts about chemistry and French history.
The pacing of these books is really fascinating to me. It's somewhere between a Secrets of Droon pacing, but it also has a sort of meandering train of thought, stream of consciousness, Narnia vibe.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's very slow, but also very fast at the same time. I don't know how to describe it, but Nancy will be like, oh, and then I went to the store and I sold some things and I went home and I cooked dinner and then I found out the clue of the case and I followed the guy to the stairs and then I talked to the man and oh my God, this web of conspiracy goes so much deeper than... And then I went home and, and you're like, whoa, a lot just happened, but also... not a lot just happened. Yeah. What's going on? And like you said, Victoria, it very much feels like a story that's meant to be read out loud.
Yeah.
Because a modern book might have lots of scene breaks and cuts in the action. And, like Nancy's going to bed now, so I'll cut here and we'll pick up when things get interesting again. But this book does not cut. There are no cuts.
Yeah.
And also, it does the young mystery thriller thing where it needs a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, no matter how weird or unnecessary the cliffhanger may be or how disconnected from the plot it is. The part in the 99 Steps that really got me was when they're climbing up some stairs in a very narrow passage. And then Nancy's like, oh no, a very large woman is coming towards us. How will we get by her? And it's like, maybe she'll knock us down and then we'll like die at the bottom of the steps. And the very next chapter, it's like the big woman went by. Yeah. And they kept climbing. And I was like, what?
They say something really horrible and like body shame.
Yeah. And I was like, what?
That was not great.
Was this related to the story? Nope, it wasn't. All right, we'll keep going.
I slightly regret choosing this book.
Well, we're getting a full spectrum.
But we are getting the full spectrum because also in this book, there's a lot more comments made to Nancy's friend Bess about her appearance that I was like, that's not nice.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
Bess gets the short end of the stick in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so for background, so there's Nancy. She's the girl detective. Nancy has two best friends, and they're always described the exact same way in every book, which is why I very distinctly remember this. And they're both cousins. The two best friends are cousins. So there's George, who is described as the tomboyish, short dark hair, tall, slim, and athletic frame. And then there's her cousin, Bess, who is shorter and slightly plump, is how she's described.
And Bess loves food. Oh, what a character trait.
She's also like the more timid, quote-unquote girly and feminine one of the group. In the spectrum of like femininity, you've got George, Nancy, and then Bess.
Buttercup, Bubbles, and Blossom.
Well, I guess George would be Buttercup. Yeah. And then
Bess would be Bubbles.
Yeah, Bess
We're
would be Bubbles.
We're talking Powerpuff Girls here.
Okay. I was so lost. I was like, is this like a My Little Pony reference? What?
Which actually their hair colors also match because Nancy has strawberry blonde auburn hair like Blossom, and then Bess, I don't remember what hair color Bess has. But
Do they
I always
fly
think
and
she's
shoot
blonde.
lasers like the Powerpuff Girls?
Yes. No.
Whoa.
It's easy to miss in the 99 steps between going to lunch and looking at historical sites.
In the 99 steps, Bess and George go with her to France to help her with this case, but also just to have a bit of fun.
And they all speak French?
Yes, they all speak French.
Casually.
Which is,
as you do,
pretty impressive.
There's definitely some remarks that have not aged well.
It's a very 40s way to describe your female protagonist. Because they always use the word attractive. Yeah. Which, like...
it's like, how do I qualify that?
At one end of the scale, it's like, okay, it's a very, I guess, efficient, but also attractiveness is subjective. And also, why?
It's like, whoever you are, whatever you think is attractive, just picture that.
Picture that.
Picture that. Does it make it easier for you to keep reading and buying these books? Picture that.
And then later on in other series, she's definitely way more sexualized.
Really?
Whoa.
Yeah. It caters to the male gaze so strongly.
That's really interesting because in my head, before I read these books, I always imagined Nancy Drew as like a kid, like 12. Like
she's 18 in the originals.
And they really make a point to say that she's 18, like multiple times in every book. I was not familiar with the series, but it definitely changed my perspective on everything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say she's very sexualized in the quote-unquote classic canon books, but there are some books that came out in the 80s and 90s. A lot of the covers have, it's always like Nancy in the foreground, and then there's just like some dude in the background who's like looking at her.
I've seen
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
It's always like that. And then there's also graphic novels where she's drawn in a much more anime style, and it's definitely super sexualized.
Well, it's even just between these two books. The first one, Secret of the Old Attic, being 1944 and Mystery of the 99 Steps being 66, I think. It's interesting. It coincides with, I think, what happened with the Hardy Boys during that time as well, where you go from a lot of these like local mysteries that are implausibly, but still compellingly all occurring within a single like city's like radius.
This one very stressed out mayor is like, hey, these things have to stop. What's happening?
But in the later books, both for the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, it became more international. And it seems like that also coincides with a time when the way that they're written sort of shifts a little bit, at least for Nancy Drew. Nancy does a lot more independent, like she's collaborating, but she also does a lot more independent sleuthing and a lot of careful analysis in Secret in the Old Attic, looking for the music and investigating this like textile plant and like talking to the CEO and like finding a way in through personal connections to like get access to this secret lab.
Several times, too.
Yeah.
Even after the CEO's like, I don't like you anymore, she still finds a way to like wiggle herself into the heavily guarded plant.
Yeah. It's really cool. And then in the 99 Steps, it's like she's still investigating, but it's like they're just going around, and then suddenly George gets like pulled into a palace, like Louis the 16th or whatever's palace, and it's like, oh no, George has been kidnapped. And then they run inside and they're like, oh, George is passed out on the king's bed.
Haha, funny.
Whoa.
And I'm like, not funny?
This is terrifying.
That's the other thing, too. How Nancy and her friends navigate the world that seems to be constantly out to get them with a sort of indifference almost. Like, oh, what a lovely day. Oh, my friend was knocked out. Off to get croissants. Like,
yeah. And there's less like overt threats and violence in the earlier book, in the old attic.
Yeah,
like
but they still exist.
Yeah, there's
She's
like
still
a
getting
prowler.
actively stalked constantly.
Yeah.
And she does get physically attacked and tied up and threatened with death via spider.
Yeah.
That's a threat to your life, and yet there's a sort of casualness about how she goes about things.
I mean,
a determined casualness.
Determined casualness. For whatever reason, it feels like the earlier Nancy, it feels like that casualness comes more from like intense focus. Like there's this obsessive quality about her that's like, I gotta solve the case. I gotta solve the case. Oh shoot, I'm in real trouble now. Oh, thank goodness, my friends showed up. And my platonic boyfriend, Ned, who appears. But it was very funny when I told my mom we were reading these. She was like, oh, is Ned in that one? And I was like, I think he shows up at the end. She's like, yeah, they rarely do anything more than, I think, drive around to town. I don't even think they hold hands.
I had no context for Ned. I was like, Ned?
No.
Who's this guy? Oh, he's gone. All right, cool.
Yeah, when I said that there aren't recurring characters, I didn't realize that Ned kind of just shows up in The Secret of the Old Attic. And there's no preamble.
Yeah.
Nancy's like been tied up, and then she shows up and she's like, oh, Ned, it's you. And it just says, Ned Nickerson showed up and did this. It doesn't say, Ned Nickerson, the boy that Nancy is going out with. Nothing.
Yeah.
It's just Ned.
It is very...
And you don't need Ned in that scene. He serves no real purpose.
Well, he has to squish the spider because, of course,
Yeah.
well, are the ladies going to do it?
I
No,
mean, Nancy,
it must be Ned.
Nancy does kill a few spiders.
Does she?
Yeah.
I don't even recall.
The first time the spiders show up, like she and her dad go around and they squish a bunch of them. And then when she sneaks into the textile factory, she also kills a spider.
I missed that entirely.
Another Black Widow.
Don't worry, Nancy gets her own share of killing spiders.
Okay. I relent. It just
Ned...
made a point of like, and Ned bravely squished the spider.
There's other books where Ned is a much more prominent character, and sometimes he does help Nancy solve her cases in a more extensive fashion than just showing up to like save her. Yeah, this is also not a great introduction to Ned, but
alas, there's like 127 of these in the original run.
I was really torn between choosing the 99 Steps one and choosing another book that focuses on something supernatural is going in this town. But it's actually not supernatural. It's just some guy. That was my favorite part about Nancy Drew, was that there was nothing supernatural ever going on, even if it seemed like it. Even if it seemed like the house was haunted or there were ghosts in the town, it always turned out to be some person was up to no good.
And Nancy's very, very much repeatedly, there is no ghosts. Ghosts are not real.
Yeah.
Please stop freaking out. Ghosts are not real.
Which, to contrast with the recent CW adaptation of Nancy Drew, it's all supernatural, which is one of the, it's just straight up the town is haunted.
They Riverdaled it. Yeah.
I was really excited for it, actually, because it looked like a fun series, but I watched 2 to 3 episodes and I just couldn't get into it. But I do think that Nancy Drew as a character is very easily adaptable into various contexts and time periods, which I think is why she's so widely loved and why she so frequently comes back into pop culture, I guess. We didn't really get into plot, even though we talked about it a lot. Should I still
There's
go
a lot
into
of plot.
There's a lot
It's
of
hard
plot.
to summarize.
Well, because a lot of that plot is also just like, let me see if this gets me anywhere. No, that's kind of a dead end. Let me see if this gets me anywhere. Oh, I made a little bit of progress.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to pawn off some stuff for the old man. I can get a better price here.
Hey, Dad, how's your case going? Oh, nothing? Nothing with me, too. Breakfast? Excellent.
It's a Nancy Drew book. There's a mystery. Go read it. You'll have fun, probably.
Yeah.
I mainly wanted to kind of go into, I guess, the impact of Nancy Drew and her character. I'll also go into my lost files of Nancy Drew, which are just...
Yeah, that is a beautiful book.
Those are thick pages.
Yeah. The backstory for this book is that when I saw this book, I think it was at Costco. I think I got this at Costco.
Wow.
Excellent. Purveyor of fine books.
Yeah. I really wanted it. And I begged my mom for it. And at first she didn't want me to get it. But
How old were you?
I don't remember. Probably like 10.
Books
Yeah.
in great condition, all things considered then.
I was very careful with it. All of the inserts that come with it are still there because
impressive.
every time I
Carefully
looked at it, I
replaced.
would carefully put it back. But basically this book, it gives you a summary of what happens in the case. And then it also has pictures and inserts, like little letters you can pull out or pieces of paper that are quote unquote evidence or just interesting things. So for example, on this page for The Secret in the Old Attic, there's a bottle on the page, and then there's a danger sign that says, dangerous creatures. Sometimes villains cleverly use threatening creatures to guard their premises from unwanted visitors. During this case, I discovered that spiders can be used to make cloth and also as weapons. So it's always written from Nancy's point of view, and then you flip open the piece of paper, and then there's a black widow spider. So it always gives you interesting tidbits about the case that they didn't necessarily go into detail in the book itself. I wanted to be Nancy. I wanted to be Nancy so bad. So this book was fun for me.
Because, those pages are thick, and there's a lot of them. It really looks lovingly made because every single page is you could just look at it as is because there's so much graphic design to it. But at the same time, like you said, there's all these interactive elements. There's a 3-dimensionality to it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of work.
It reminds me of those old dragonology books.
Yeah. This was my dragons. Nancy Drew.
Also, there's way more content in that book, or in this book. The dragonology book was here's a dragon. Ooh, scales.
There's even Hannah's chicken and rice casserole recipe in this book, which is pretty sick.
Is Hannah the Drew's housekeeper?
Yes. In the original conception of the books, this was another thing that got changed in the rewrites. She used to be more of a straight up just servant.
Oh, dip.
Yeah. And then in the rewrite, they made her a housekeeper who also raised Nancy since she was young. Oh, I think in the original iteration, Nancy's mom died when she was 10. And then now they changed it so that Nancy's mom died when she was 3. Yeah.
Less trauma. Yeah. So with these rewrites, would you say the books aim for a more timeless feel, or do you think they're trying to retain, this was written in the 40s, this was written in the 70s? You can really tell between the books that these are different time periods.
It definitely has a timeless feel to it. I don't think that I've read the pre-revised ones. I had really old Nancy Drew books when I was young, though, so I would have to find them and look at the publication date. So I can't really say for sure if it feels more timeless or less timeless, but...
I mean, they're obviously still very dated.
Yeah.
But it's hard to date them within that datedness.
I mean, I think the appeal of the old Nancy Drew books is it's a time before technology. She can't just record someone saying something.
Yeah, you can't.
She doesn't have a special tiny microphone and video camera.
She has to literally go and collect physical evidence.
Or reach a point where she puts herself in such danger.
Yeah, that it becomes obvious who it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she really has to physically go and camp out in front of a suspect's home to see, or in front of, like in The Secret of the Old Attic, she and her friends camp outside the house of Mr. March's house to see if the mysterious figure who keeps coming by will reveal the entrance to the secret passageway. Yeah. Oh, I was also really into secret passageways as a kid because of Nancy Drew, because there's so many secret passageways.
There's something about also resource scarcity in the Nancy Drew books that comes into play often. Like, she mentions that, oh no, the store clerk must have sold me a faulty battery. Like, she went and bought one battery?
Yeah.
Are they individually packaged? Nancy, you gotta get more of those. Your flashlight keeps dying.
Yeah. Nancy doesn't have the resources of a cell phone to call for help if she's in danger. Like, when she's in that attic and the bad guy has tied her up and left her in the darkness with a single Black Widow spider just ready to strike at any point.
It's admittedly a tad silly.
And a very inefficient way to kill someone.
Yeah.
It is a little silly, but I was genuinely like, oh God, maybe it's just because I hate spiders.
Well, I mean, that's fair.
That was definitely the highest tension point.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I would say the factory investigating was a little bit scarier for me personally, just because trespassing is a terrifying concept for me. But there's definitely a lot of tension in that book. 99 Steps, not so much. But that old attic is spooky.
The 99 Steps, the biggest tension is that anytime they encounter a staircase, they have to count how many steps.
Can you imagine counting to 99 like a couple dozen times while climbing stairs?
Brutal.
Yeah, it sure was.
And it's not just Nancy. The bad guys are doing it too, because they leave packages on the 99th step, which means someone had to just...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the whole point of the 99 Steps book is that there's this group of alchemists who are obsessed with the number 9.
Supposedly. It's really just like one guy. And there's something I kind of find hilarious about his plot. Because in the 99 Steps, which we haven't talked much about, the whole idea is there's this like seemingly like a very prolific thief and like con artist of some sort who is pretending to be... This is, again, one of those things where it's like, oh, they updated them to get rid of some of the racist stuff, but didn't quite...
Yeah.
He's just described as the Arab. Yeah. And you're like, okay.
All right.
But it turns out it's not... It's not a xenophobia plot. It's literally just this French guy who is almost in a way invoking the like problematic mysticism of like Orientalism.
Yeah.
This idea that anything east and south of Europe is inherently mysterious and magical. And he's just tricking this extremely wealthy French landowner into thinking that he's a successful alchemist.
Yeah.
Just by vibes alone.
And the landowner's like, I'll pay you money to not let out your gold secrets.
Yeah.
Your ability to turn things into gold, which he stole a bunch of gold. Just sell the gold. You don't need this extra step. I mean, 99 steps, but whatever.
It's, he's got a patron now, but it's like...
But it's just like this one guy.
Yeah. It's just this one guy who's like coring out pieces of charcoal, putting gold inside them, burning them in front of this French guy and going, look, I turned the stuff into gold.
Also, he's like sitting in this ancient ruin, this medieval ruin, just in the dark, just like, this is where I live.
It almost feels like a Totally Spies kind of plot where it's like, if your secret gets out that you can just make gold, it'll ruin our gold-backed economy and I'll be destroyed. You must hold off doing it so I can divest all of my finances into precious stones like diamonds. And you're like, this is a really convoluted...
Yeah. The only real part that was interesting to me was the 99 Steps part where the woman has a dream about falling down these 99 steps and then she gets this mysterious letter. And then it's revealed that when she was a child, like 3 years old, she had a nanny who was playing with her, and she blindfolded her and had her go down these 99 steps because she was dating this guy who's an alchemist, but he wanted to keep his alchemy lab a secret. So she blindfolded this kid, but then she accidentally fell down the stairs. And then
As you
ever
do.
since then, she's had horrible nightmares about these steps. And the alchemist guy was worried that she would tell someone about his secret alchemy lab. So that's why he sent a letter, a threatening letter. He also has a twin brother in the States.
Again, a lot of steps here.
Yeah.
There's so many moving pieces in this book that I totally forgot about and also was not conveyed in.
I think what the Old Attic does well that maybe the 99 Steps is missing, and they're both very convoluted plots, but the Old Attic has that human element. You really, really want the Marches to succeed. You want them to stop starving to death. Whereas the 99 Steps, I guess you're supposed to sympathize with this very wealthy business owner who's threatening to lay off all of his employees just for this crazy scam.
One thing I did make note of was at the end when Monsieur Leblanc finds out that he's been scammed, he says, I'm very sorry. This was my fault because I was too greedy and I won't do it again. And I was like, this is the most unrealistic part of this book. When the rich CEO business owner guy admits fault and then willingly says that he knows that he was greedy and will not be greedy in the future. And I was like, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Also, at the end of the Old Attic, because there's a subplot about two rival textile factories who are like stealing each other's formulas. And at the end, they're like, well, we both have the same formula now. Might as well become one company. And I was like, whoa, all right, you guys hated each other like 20 minutes ago, but...
But remember, the owner of the bigger textile factory was like, I had no idea that this formula came from a lesser-known textile factory. I'm completely innocent. I had not a clue. It was all Bushy Trot's fault, that rapscallion.
After being a clearly very evil man for the whole book, he's like, I'm sorry. But it's okay because economy.
Gotta have those nice clothes.
Yes,
made
and
from
this is-
spider silk.
And this is 40s America. The economy will never be bad again. No. No. We are on the top right now.
Rising, baby.
This is semi-related, but there was one jaw-dropping moment for me in the Old Attic that I do not think was intentional.
Okay.
But I absolutely went, oh, in the car when I heard it. When Mr. March goes, yes, the oldest part of the house has a large servants' quarter. Back when lots of people had more servants. And I was like, oh, okay.
I think that was one of the clearest parts where they probably revised it to say servants and not
slaves. Yeah.
I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is one of those houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. If you weren't so sad, Mr. March.
If your concern wasn't exclusively for your young granddaughter who is without parents
and randomly catches measles halfway through the book.
Yeah.
Just to give us a cliffhanger. You know? Gotta have those cliffhangers.
Gotta have those cliffhangers. I mean, I also want to call out the Hardy Boys' Extreme Danger for having a cliffhanger that's like, oh no, Frank took a wrong turn on his motorcycle and now he's lost. Begins next chapter. Luckily, I have a GPS and I'm not lost anymore.
Oh, yes.
But that's the format, I suppose, for these books.
I was trying to look for this quote that talks about the character of Nancy Drew being this person who can kind of do both that I thought was interesting. This is from someone called Kathleen Chamberlain, who wrote in The Secrets of Nancy Drew. For over 60 years, the Nancy Drew series has told readers that they can have the benefits of both dependence and independence without the drawbacks, that they can help the disadvantaged and remain successful capitalists, that they can be both elitist and democratic, and they can be both child and adult, and that they can both be liberated women and also daddy's little girls.
It seems an interesting corollary, if I'm saying that right, to the Hardy Boys, which probably, just reading about them, it seemed to have a similar sort of effect on the other end of the spectrum, where it's this ideal of being able to make your father proud, but at the same time...
do cool and radical things.
Yeah, it's like you are an independent boy, who can make his father proud, but also doesn't need his father's pride because his father doesn't do anything and is retired, I guess.
Your dad's useless, but he likes what you do.
Yeah.
Thumbs up from your useless dad.
Yeah. It's interesting, especially looking at the ways that Nancy Drew has like evolved over the years and the way that she is, like you said, Victoria, embodying the best of both things.
Yeah, like she's able to play to both contradicting, not like ideals of like femininity, but she appeals to people who are not as traditionally what society would expect. But then she also does play well into the role of, like Jino said, traditional girl who
cooks and cleans and does what dad says. And
well liked by all and
loves dresses and boys and automobiles.
And I feel like the more you dig down into this, the more it feels like you're just landing on different definitions of like escapism. And you could say like, oh, escapism to what end? You know, maybe some of those ends are instantiating ideals of things that are not necessarily going to be things that everyone can or should want to live up to. But it's also important to, I think, recognize like there's a lot of good to be done through this. And reading like little passages about how a lot of women who today hold positions of, you know, vast influence and whatnot in the government, crediting Nancy Drew with being a source of inspiration in works of fiction that they read when they were kids. My grandma, I'm pretty sure if I'm recalling correctly, really loved Nancy Drew. And I really love my grandma, so transitively, I love Nancy Drew as well. It seems one of those like concrete edifices of fiction, where that seems to be a big case with escapism, where you can embody a bunch of conflicting things that wouldn't work in the real world, but it allows you to like live out the satisfaction of getting to have all of those things at once, which I'm not necessarily saying, again, is good in all instances. But even if you look at something like Star Wars, like just original Star Wars, the escapism quality is I'm fighting this evil empire and I can be successful and heroic, but also plucky and, you know, facing down terrible odds. And it's like, you know, realistically, if you look at a situation like that, it's harrowing and it's traumatic. But in Star Wars, it's exciting and dramatic.
Get a gold medal.
Get a gold medal. Yeah. Make new friends. Kiss your sister. Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
In a weird way, the farther you get from reality, the easier it is to do that escapism in some ways and like get away with certain aspects of it. But the closer you are to reality with something like the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew in this particular case, the more that line tends to be very like tough to toe in some regards, it feels, just because it's closer to lived experiences.
It's very much the idea that in this world, everyday problems don't really affect Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. They don't have everyday problems. Their problems are the mystery.
Yeah.
Or international terrorists or something.
Which you kind of want when you're a kid or a person with everyday problems. You're like, give me a fun adventure.
Yeah.
And even as an adult, you can look at that and say like, oh, they don't have to worry about jobs or taxes. They don't really have to worry about school. I mean, they do, quote, worry about school, unquote. But it's always fixed for them, right?
Nancy goes to school, but hardly ever does she talk about it.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Hardy Boys, it's like they go to school and they have referenced school problems. But for Nancy Drew, it's even more like... It's so vague. It's just like, it only comes up if it's relevant to the case. Like in The Secret of the Old Attic, it only comes up because Nancy is like, oh, my classmate, her father is the owner of the textile company that my dad is investigating. Like, I can kind of like get in good favor with her and make up excuses to go see her father or to like go to her house, and no one will really question it. Yeah. But that's the only time school is like referenced.
It's always summer break.
Yeah.
I think in an earlier version, she was like a graduate of high school. And so this was like her thing. She didn't have a job, but she was a sleuth.
Yeah, she's 18, so it's kind of like the ambiguous
They mention a college in one of the books, right? Nancy mentions college.
She might. I believe her platonic boyfriend, Ned, is a student at like something Emerson College.
Yes, Emerson.
Oh, I don't remember for sure. Maybe they are in college. I don't know.
It's
all I
hard
know
to
is
say.
That the three boys that they're dating, they're all football players.
Oh, great.
America.
There's a picture of them in this book.
Solve the crimes.
That's them.
Acknowledge the existence of your romantic love interests.
There they go.
There
Goodbye.
they go.
So there's Ned Nickerson, and then there's Dave Evans, who is Bess's special beau, as this book says.
Special beau.
So vague.
And then there's Bert Eddleton is George's favorite date.
Favorite date?
Favorite date.
Does she have less favorite dates?
It's all upstanding. We don't do anything with each other that wouldn't be proper. But we do see each other. There you are.
We look at each other respectfully from a distance, and then we'll turn 22 and get married immediately. Off to that white picket fence.
Ha-ha!
Aha, the economy's great.
Everything's going fine.
Another thing I found on Wikipedia that I thought was interesting, the creator of Nancy Drew, Edward Stratemeyer, who also created the Hardy Boys, as we talked about in the last episode, he believed that a woman's place was in the home, but he knew that a lot of Hardy Boys readers were women. And so he wanted to capitalize on girls' interests in mysteries by offering them a strong female heroine.
That's just capitalism at work, baby.
Yeah.
That's why the system works.
That's why it works.
That's why it works.
We can have our strong female protagonists from the most cynical of money-derived places. There's nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong.
Works like a charm, all of it.
And then I also wanted to go into one of the adaptations for Nancy Drew, which I quite enjoyed when I was a young child. There's a movie that was just called Nancy Drew, but it was a 2007 film that starred Emma Roberts. In this one, they tried to modernize her. So she's going to high school. She is an amateur sleuth, and her father gets a job in California. So they have to move from their small town of River Heights, which is where most Nancy Drew books are set, and they go to California. So now she has to contend with the Hollywood Californian crowd.
Within the 30-mile limit for film set driving.
Yeah, so her dad specifically says, it would be good for you to live life as a normal teenager and not get into so much trouble with solving cases. That movie is all about Nancy being an outcast at this school that she goes to. She goes to the school, but she's still dressed in her typical 50s outfits and like penny loafers.
Oh, wow.
So is her hometown like trapped in that decade?
I think it's just her aesthetic.
Huh.
She's kind of old-fashioned, and then all the popular girls make fun of her because she's not wearing the in style
The
of
latest
clothing.
in...
Yeah, but it was fun. It was.
What was your favorite part of the movie?
Well, all I remember from this movie, Nancy goes to a high school party.
Oh, okay.
And she's very out of her element. She's very awkward because she's never gone to a party. There's a kid who has an allergic reaction and starts choking. The kid was allergic to peanut butter, and then one of the girls kisses him, and then so he has an allergic reaction. And then everyone's like freaking out, call 911. And then Nancy's like, oh my God, he's gonna die if I don't save his life. So she like grabs a pen and does the thing.
Oh, the trachea bypass?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
There's our OG Nancy Drew coming to the fore. Hard-hitting, violent, tough as nails Nancy.
Her character arc is that she tries to fit in with the high schoolers, and then she realizes, no, I just want to solve mysteries. So then she just solves mysteries. And then Ned shows up.
As he does.
I'm here.
I'm here. Summoned from the ether.
He shows up as an early birthday present.
Huh?
To visit her.
Oh.
This is giving me like Barbie movie Hi Ken vibes.
No, yeah, Ned is literally the Ken of the Nancy Drew series.
Hey Nancy, my job is Ned.
Yeah.
Ned.
Good old Ned.
They kiss at the end. Wow. And then he leaves.
Classic Ned.
I don't know. That to me, it sounds, if what I've been told is true, the most they've ever done.
In the CW show, she's not dating Ned, but they're kind of like friends with benefits.
Of course they are.
Well, it is the CW, I suppose.
But apparently at the end, they don't end up together.
I will say, in addition to that Hardy Boys, Undercover Boys fandom shipping Joe and this mysterious Jean-Claude character, whom we can't pinpoint, there was a healthy amount of people shipping Frank and Nancy.
Yes, when I was looking up Hardy Boys ships,
I was deep in the Hardy Boys AO3.
Yeah, oh no.
We might have mentioned this a little bit, but I want to triangulate like a real timeline here with you. So you were at what age when you started with Nancy Drew, if you can recall?
I was 8.
8.
It was third grade specifically.
Third grade.
Every day in third grade, all I was thinking about was, when can I read the next Nancy Drew book?
Amazing. Goals. At what age did that fall off at all, to the point where, not that your love for Nancy Drew fell off, but your engagement with it?
I think it was once I finished reading all 56 books. I think it took me maybe till fourth grade.
So like a year.
A year you just pound through 56 Nancy Drew books.
It must have been longer than that. That's
I
my
mean,
best
you're reading
guess.
one a day.
Yeah.
So
Victoria's a
But
very
not
fast
every
reader.
day.
Oh, not every day. Oh,
even
thank
every
goodness.
other day, that's less than a year.
Yeah.
That's a third of a year.
Well, mainly it was like, let's say I read 3 books in a week, but then I'd have to wait another week or 2 to get the next installment.
How many weeks are in a year?
52?
Yeah.
So on average, 1 a week. Yeah, that's a year.
Yeah. Wow, incredible.
I seem to recall that some of the later books were even harder to get. So I don't think that I read the last book, quote unquote last book, until maybe 5th grade? I don't remember.
Okay. I suppose at that point the continuity was a little broken up. Were you interested just in reading that chunk, or was your plan to continue on to the rest?
Well, after that point, I basically just got my hands on whatever Nancy Drew media I could find, and I would read that. There's a Nancy Drew series called Nancy Drew Girl Detective, which is kind of a similar book format look as the Hardy Boys books. I read a lot of those. I don't remember any of them distinctly. They kind of all blur together. I read the graphic novels. Anytime I was at the library and I saw a Nancy Drew book that looked interesting, I would pick it up.
And that went till...
I want to say high school.
Okay. Into high school or just around the beginning?
I imagine I probably still read Nancy Drew books in high school, but it wasn't the same obsession that I had in elementary and middle school.
Just more of like a staple of your...
Yeah, it was just kind of like the character that you love and you come back to frequently. It's like a good friend.
Yeah. Comfort food.
Yeah.
A cozy afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
According to Wikipedia, the Girl Detective version is the version that crosses over with the Undercover Brothers version.
That's probably the crossover that I read.
Specifically, the Girl Detective series was introduced because of a drop in sales in the 90s and 2000s, which is why they ended the original run. And they decided to make her cool. Because she wasn't cool before with the kids. Learn why River Heights is such a hotbed of criminal activity.
Wow. They tried to do the Totally Spies thing where they explain world building.
Oh.
George has become moody and sloppily dressed in this series. More interested in tech and sarcastic retorts than solving mysteries.
Well, because you have to maximize, right? You got to min-max. So
Bess is now a mechanic and computers.
Oh!
But is no longer slightly overweight. Wild.
Okay.
I do remember that from the Girl Detective series because I always thought it was so fun that Bess was like this girly girl, but also really into building things.
Yeah.
Nancy Drew in this version is less than perfect, prone to forgetfulness, an object of jokes, and interested in other subjects over mysteries. So not Nancy Drew.
So The Nancy Drew we know and love is one who will probably lose her entire self to a case and vanish off the grid for years.
They really said Nancy was too perfect in the original series. We have to take her down a few notches. She has to have short-term memory.
She's got to be more relatable to the kids.
Yeah.
Wow, they did a real character flip. George is described as a pessimist.
Oh, man.
Nick is described with no personality traits. Is in college.
Just like the majority of the boys in Totally Spies.
Ned is a reporter in this series.
Oh, okay.
I remember that. He works for the River Heights Bugle.
Oh, well, that's a fun little bit of...
personality.
I mean, yes.
As job.
As
anything for Ned.
But also just like synchronicity. What with Nancy discovering things, and then Ned can be there at the end, like,
and
let me take your picture, Nancy, and write about how incredible you are.
And then we'll almost hold hands.
Then I'll look at you fondly.
Off I go.
Oh, in the Nancy Drew Girl Detective series, I do remember this. Nancy has a nemesis called Deirdre. her father is also a lawyer, so there's a little bit of rivalry there.
Ah.
But Deidre also has a big crush on Ned, so there's also rivalry there. And
they both want the cardboard cutout.
The imperfect children.
I think I remember this series more than I think I do.
Huh.
I only remember it after reading the details. Like, I don't just have it in the back of my mind.
That
Makes
was
sense.
it with the Undercover Brothers. It's not a series that's burned into my mind, but when you read the details, you're like, oh, that was fun.
It's in the deep archives.
Yeah, there we go.
The little people in your head have to like open up the cabinet and
Dust
go
them
like,
off. Gross.
Well, thanks for joining me on this Nancy Drew flashback to Victoria's past.
Of course, thank you.
It's important as Americans that we read classic American literature like Nancy Drew.
Like literally.
Support your local bank.
Support your local bank. Buy war bonds. I don't know if that supports the bank as much as just the government.
Support your local war. Buy bank bonds.
Support your local bonds. Buy war banks.
I do still wish that they would adapt Nancy Drew, but keep that timelessness aspect of it.
I would love to see, like, bring to the screen, like, very old Nancy Drew, not with all of the problematic elements.
Yeah.
Same for Hardy Boys, but just like, give me something that's, you know, from the 40s, and let me just see some of what these punk kids and single-minded detectives are up to.
I'd be so down for that.
Yeah, like, I don't need them to be affluent on the cusps of 20-somethings in Malibu or whatever.
Yeah, we're always trying to modernize. Why can't we just go back to a time when...
You know what?
Maybe not.
Maybe modernize.
Yeah.
Maybe modernize.
Maybe not.
Well, until next time, go read every Nancy Drew book, but in order.
Ooh.
From the very first one to the most recent.
Do it and you win a prize. A free personal pan pizza from Pizza Hut.
Tied in with the latest adaptation of Nancy Drew.
There's so many Nancy
It's not
Drew
true.
books.
Don't do it.
No, it's
please,
not.
Please, Pizza Hut, be kind.
That'd be
was
an
a
impressive
joke.
crossover.
If we were sponsored by Pizza Hut, I mean, I wouldn't complain.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Until next time, go play the Nancy Drew video games. I hear they're really
Wait,
good.
I didn't even talk about the video games.
I don't know what these are.
Any game where you get to be a detective and solve mysteries, I was really into them. Nancy Drew is the whole reason why I was into spies and detectives in the first place. So thanks, Nancy Drew. That's my personality now.
Quick then. What was your favorite video game?
I don't remember them enough to talk about them, to be honest.
You just
but
remember what
I
they
just
did
remember
for you?
they were like point and click games. And I just thought they were fun. I don't remember how I got them.
They
Games
just
I could
spawned in your home and you were like, excellent.
Yeah. They were thrown in through a brick through the window. Like how the Hardy Boys get their missions.
After you beat the game, it reformats into a Beastie Boys album.
Until next time, count every step on that staircase you're walking up.
1, 2, 3,
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
11,
12,
22.
Whoa! How'd you get up there?
Thank you for listening to Nostalgia Club. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Twitter @_Nostalgia Club and on Instagram @Nostalgia Club Podcast. Leave a comment, give us a rating, and subscribe. You can also send us an email with your suggestions for what we should review next at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com.
I'm just Ned. I go to college and I have a car.
That's it.
That's the whole song. That's the whole song.
Oh, Ned.
Oh, Ned.
Teenage heartthrob.